Welcome to this Conveyancing Matters news update for April 2022.
Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Stu. How are you?
Very good, Lorraine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. So we've got a fair bit of news for April 2022 in our Conveyancing Matters update. Some are sort of continuing themes, it's fair to say, Stu, but what's caught your eye so far this month?
Yeah, there's a few things, haven't there, that have cropped up. But first and foremost, the biggest news is probably a certain author releasing a certain book.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say so, Stu.
I didn't say it was any good, but you need to tell us all about it before we can
Give me the opportunity for a shameless
to buy it.
Well, yes, and you know, I've got one here.
Oh, wow.
It looks very similar in style to the previous one because they're part of a series, the Conveyancing Companion series. Yeah, Stu, the lovely guys at Law Brief Publishing have let me go off on another flight of fancy. So this time I've produced the practical guide to residential freehold conveyancing. And what it's actually designed to be, Stu, is you know, for somebody who's as experienced as you, you would know everything in it. The idea really is, and it's been a concern of mine for quite a long time, that what the profession now has is a very, very large sort of strata of sort of fantastic unqualified staff who need additional support. I think some firms are brilliant with the training, some firms less so because they don't have time. So really what I've tried to do in this book, Stu, is sort of cover most of the aspects of a freehold residential conveyancing transaction that sort of paralegals, support staff would carry out. And what I've done is take them through the practice area. I mean, clearly there's a lot on, you know, anti-money laundering and due diligence, but what I've done as I go throughout the book, Stu, is tell them the land law links. So where there's a bit of background land law to really start to give them a flavour that, you know, our land law is the sort of foundation on which our conveyancing practice stands. And I've also throughout the book give them what's, you know, what I call practice points. So, you know, these are the things you need to be looking out for. These are the things that happen. These are the things that you really need to be, you know, concentrating on and making sure. And the idea really, and of course, unsurprisingly, it's all about mitigating risk, isn't it, Stu? So I talk about risk in every chapter and then sort of summarize all the risks at the end. So, I mean, I give them a land law and transaction overview. Then we go into regulation, professional conduct and client care, then due diligence and money. Then I talk about title to land. Obviously, I just talk a little bit about unregistered, but at the end of the day, Stu, it's a fairly specialist topic on its own now. So I explain what a register of title is. I, explain how to draft a contract. There's a sample contract in there. As I say, there's a title. There's a load of things that you would often come across on a title, whether it's some undisclosed covenants, whether it's a missing deed, you know, what the mortgage means, all of that stuff. Then sort of taking instructions on a sale and purchase and some information on indemnity insurance. Then progressing a sale transaction, progressing a purchase transaction. So I talk about all the searches and the lenders, a little bit about, you know, how to draft meaningful inquiries, for example. I obviously talk about the protocol and exchange to post-completion. Again, really focusing on the tasks so that paralegals would do and support staff. And a little bit about future developments. But what I really wanted it to be, Stu, was sort of a guide for that profile of person to sort of have on their desk to dip into. The conveyancing handbook, for example, is brilliant, but I just think it's too big and too much for most people. And, you know, people like yourself might be interested in it, Stu, because you could look at it and say, gosh, yeah, that's got loads of stuff in it that I wish I'd had the time to tell my staff. So
sounds like it's something that, you know, all our firms could really use in terms of giving out to their staff. You know, there's a mass number now, aren't there, of new people that we need to come into the industry. With a shortage of numbers, so surely it's a given. Where can we get this book, Lorraine?
Oh, Law Brief Publishing. Law Brief Publishing, the lovely guys Gary and Tim at Law Brief Publishing. It's now, and I was so excited. I must say, I got an email from Law Brief Publishing yesterday saying your book is now available on Amazon, which is actually a really exciting thing to read, I have to say. But actually, also, Stu, if people go to the Adapt Law website, there is actually an author's code which I'll put on today, where people can get a discount. So if you get the code, you can then go to Law Brief. Order it from Law Brief, apply the code and get a little discount, and actually their postage and packing is also free. So
there you go.
And if anybody's sort of might be interested in an inspection copy, if they've got a bigger firm or maybe even law school, perhaps teaching the SQE, that sort of thing, and they want an inspection copy, I've got some. So if anybody wants to contact me directly, I'm quite happy to send them a copy to have a look at. But yeah, I'm really, really excited about this one, Stu. I think it's all right. I'll send you yours. And we'll see how we go, but I really want it to just be really helpful. I want it to be like me sort of chatting to support staff as they sit there dragging through conveyancing, because my big theory on all this, apart from just managing the risks, Stu, is that loads and loads of brilliant staff in conveyancing firms, they know how to do things but they don't know why. And I think if you don't know why, you don't know what you don't know. That's where the risk for law firms comes in. So the idea is, and a lot of the time I'm talking to the reader saying, okay, well, you've perhaps reached the scope of your knowledge now, or the edge of your knowledge. You now need to go and talk to someone else about this. So if you don't know that you're about to sail into a problem, then it's a big risk for the firm. So that's the shameless plug. So thank you for that opportunity, Stu. Let me give our lovely viewers a bit of actual news. So the Land Registry have updated Practice Guide 73 on statements of truth. Now, conveyancers are going to need statements of truth a fair bit. These are the sort of pro forma documents that the Land Reg produce to in a property context. There are others, of course. Sort of standard, there's about 5 of them that we can use to remove a Form A restriction. We can use to make an application for title based on lost deeds, etc. And the point is, it sort of gives you the framework and the information that the Land Registry need, and we sort of fill it in. And I think that particularly if you've got an additional bit of land that a seller has occupied to which they don't have title, then we're probably going to ask for a statement of truth. And the point about the change is that the Land Reg had said for a long time that they could only be signed in wet ink, i.e., by the applicant with a pen, and they've now confirmed that statements of truth can be signed by the applicant in using the Mercury signature process or as conveyancer certified electronic signatures. And also, as a sort of separate aside to that, Stu, well, in fact, the subject of my first book, Electronic Signatures in Conveyancing, I've got to now update that book, Stu, because the Land Reg have just sort of jettisoned everything that was in Practice Guide 8 on Mercury signatures and electronic signatures and witnessed electronic signatures, and they've created a new Practice Guide 82 on electronic signatures accepted by the Land Reg. So if conveyancers are going down that route and they're looking to get a software provider that encompasses electronic signatures as part of the package, the key thing is conveyancers have got to make sure that whatever the software provider produces or the app provider is actually in a format that's acceptable to the Land Reg. And they still have some really specific inquiries there, Stu, requirements there, Stu. So we've got Practice Guide 73, but also Practice Guide 82 is new, in case anyone's interested. So what next, Stu?
Well, maybe we should sort of bring up the Leasehold Reform Ground Rent Act 2022. I know it's a subject that we've sort of covered here and there, haven't we, with ground rents and what's going to happen, and a lot of sort of suspected things have been discussed, but I think we're getting there now, aren't we? So will it be an end to all our problems regarding ground rents, escalating ground rents, or not, as the case may be? What do you think?
Well, I think the quick answer to that is no, obviously. So the Act itself comes into force on the 30th of June 2022. So we now do have the date that it comes into force. And fundamentally, I mean, it does a fair few things. But it's the Act that bans the charging of ground rents on the creation of new leases, albeit there are a number of types of leases that are excluded from the provisions of the Act. So that's all well and good, as we've said for some time, and commentators have said, Stu, for some time about new leases. But of course, we've got the millions of existing leases sort of swirling around that you and I and our conveyancing colleagues are going to have to carry on dealing with. And I would say, yeah, the Act is it's great and it's a good step forward. But of course, I think what we've now got to do, and where the job gets harder, is if we are purchasing an existing lease, which of course, statistically is going to be much more likely because of the various Competition and Markets Authority, the various CMA investigations, Stu. I actually think on any existing lease purchase, what a conveyancer needs to be doing is going to the website of the original developer that granted the lease to find out that particular developer's attitude, if it's got one, to varying an existing ground rent.
Well, I was going to ask you about this because I've seen numerous people discussing this on various platforms and social media. But how does it affect us, day to day doing the conveyancing? Surely there's good news linked with bad, insofar as this is going to make our job surely harder, because are we now talking every leasehold? We're looking at maybe a deed of variation. Well, are we going to have to now contact every builder, like you say? What about the ones that are no longer in existence? Where do we go with it? Surely, to me, yeah, great, somebody's looking at this, but I don't want to sort of sit here and say, yeah, brilliant, rainbows and butterflies on ground rents now, and paint a picture that we don't have to worry about it anymore. I think the point needs to be made that, again, this is more work I think we'll be looking at.
Harder
work, complex work that probably it's going to be difficult for a general client and estate agents, when we're giving updates, to actually understand.
Yeah, I completely agree, Stu, because what a lot of the developers have done is basically jump before they were pushed. And the thing is, they have all got slightly different sort of requirements, attitudes, permutations. Taylor Wimpey, for example, they've sort of taken a view, well, if we were the original freeholder, then we're going to do this. If we weren't the original freeholder, but we were involved, then we're going to do this. And you're quite right, it's quite a complex thing. So on the one hand, we do have, really, as a result of the push from the Leasehold Reform Ground Rent Act and the attitude to ground rents and the really terribly bad press and the investigation by the CMA, a lot of the developers are taking a view on their existing leases with existing higher ground rents, and they are saying, yes, we are prepared to reduce the ground rent or reduce it to a peppercorn or whatever. But the point is, there's no consistency, Stu. Some developers aren't doing anything. Some developers have, as I say, jumped before they're pushed, and some developers or big freeholders are hanging back and waiting for the outcome of the CMA investigation. So the point is, you're right. My attitude to this would be, on every purchase of an existing lease, we do need to be looking, at the website of the original freeholder to see if they have, if they're prepared to, or the current freeholder, if they're prepared to vary the lease, because if there are ground rent problems. And you're absolutely right, that will mean a deed of variation. I think people seem to have forgotten
costs. What about costs? Who's
exactly.
paying for it?
I agree.
I just find it quite annoying to an extent that it's painted as such a good news story.
Yes.
Without anybody actually sort of sticking up for our profession, in that, yeah, this is going to be a shed load of extra work that we're going to have to do. If we're involved in drafting variations, that's not something that's that simple. Even if we're not, and the developer takes that in-house, there's a cost that's applicable to this.
Yeah.
No doubt they're going to want to pass on potentially to the client we act for. So all of a sudden, a client that didn't have a problem when they bought the property, we're telling them, actually, this is a problem. You might have to pay, £500 or whatever the case, £1,000 worth of legal fees to solve it.
Yeah, and I think, common sense would dictate. And if people disagree with this, I'm very, very happy to have people's views and a dialogue on it, Stu, but common sense would dictate that if you're acting for a seller, you need to be doing a little bit of poking around to see what the position sort of might be, so that you can tell your seller client and warn them, as you say, because it's them that may have to pick up the tab. Because I actually can't, you're right, I can't see the developers all just sort of bending over and saying, yeah, well, we'll do all this, but we'll pay for it. They might, but I doubt it. It's the old devil will be in the detail thing. But of course, conversely, if you're acting for a buyer, so it's your client that's going to end up with no chair when the music stops. Well, you're going to have to check this original freeholder, current freeholder, see if they've got a position on this. If there's a problem with the ground rent, of course, if it's 50 quid, you're going to be all right. And advise accordingly. And you're probably going to have to involve your lender. And even if everybody's on the same page and everybody's happy with the deed of variation, I mean, there's going to be a deed of variation, I assume, that's just a standard form of deed that's punted out by the developer. I doubt very much there'll be any sort of meaningful amendments permitted to those deeds. And then, of course, you've got the issue, well, if a deed of variation is entered into, at what point, is the seller going to say to the buyer, well, we'll give you the signed deed and you submit it with your registration? Or is a prudent buyer going to say, well, actually, no, it's your problem. There might be an issue. There might be some land registry requisitions. You sort it out now before exchange. But we've got a big delay as a result.
This is the key thing, isn't it? That's why I feel sometimes frustrated that it's not being discussed properly, because it will lead to another general delay on leaseholds.
Yes, and
if it wasn't bad enough already, and it's we take the flak for that. So I think it needs to be discussed and put out there that actually this isn't something that is our doing, and the world needs to know.
And also, of course, it's going to be umpteen more applications for the land registry to process, and they've taken a caning in the last few years, and they're, to be fair to them, trying to do something about it. But and if I've completely misinterpreted what's going on, and the law is just sort of magically going to vary leases and it's all going to fall away without a deed of variation, and we needn't worry our pretty little heads about it, I'm very happy to be corrected. But and I know, Stu, that a deed can't just be sort of unilaterally changed because somebody thinks it might be a good idea. So on the one hand, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, Stu.
Exactly
So on the one hand,
exactly.
we've got the ground rent on new leases, but I think we've got years of pain on existing ones.
Unfortunately so.
So anything else caught your eye, Stu?
Well, there was a recent announcement by the CLC regarding indemnity insurance, and I sort of met it with mixed views, because
before you move on, Stu, I was just going to ask, was this because again, it's always the headline point. I don't deal with I don't deal with the regulator every day. Was this the sort of headline point, Stu, that CLC regulated firms, are going to have to submit at least one application for PI insurance, 2 months before the renewal deadline? That one. Yeah,
exactly that. But where my sort of confusion comes in is that we were all really doing that anyway, and I'm not sure what edge that gives us. I think on one of the recent consultations, there was a request that the insurers submit the proposals back to us, being the law firms, within a month of the current insurance expiring. Well, that's obviously a game changer. That's much better, and that's how it should be. But as a general, just submitting an application 2 months before, I would have thought, in the grand scheme of things, that's not really going to help us. It's actually getting the, not the application being submitted. It's not the problem. It's actually getting the insurers to give us the, the quotations for us to consider in plenty of time, not the night before or the day before that. That's the big issue.
Yeah, as I say, I sort of thought, well, we'd put it on the list, Stu, because I wasn't really sure what it would actually mean for firms. But I think you made that pretty clear. It's probably worth mentioning sort of in passing, Stu, isn't it? Not much to say really, but the recent land reg data has sort of shown, just moving on, that, month to date levels of, transactions are up by just over 18%, albeit the number of transactions as compared to this time last year are slightly down, but that's perhaps no surprise. So, the market's still very hot. I mean, I was talking to a estate agent friend of mine last night, still a significant shortage of stock. Not really sure there's much else for us to observe other than to to point that out, Stu. I mean, you still, you know, you're a big cheese now, Stu. You're a big cheese in the market, mate.
Not sure about that.
Still busy?
Yeah, mega busy. We're still as busy as we were last year, and that's on sort of quotes, new instructions, completions, the lot. It's a difficult one at the moment, because I also think that with this succession of bank holidays that are coming up and Easter, it's creating more peaks again where people like to sort of be in before these periods where they have time off work and so on and so forth. So we've got all that coming up in May. And of course, we've just had Easter. So it's weird, isn't it? When we have just gone through that period prior to Easter, it's like a throwback to the year before with the stamp duty.
Yeah.
And people have kind of forgotten the norm. You know, the norm used to be Easter was a mega busy period and pre-Christmas was a mega busy period. But we've had so many mega busy periods that it's all kind of merged, isn't it? But yeah, it's interesting to see sort of, you know, those volumes returning again pre-Easter. And yeah, I think the market going forward, it's mega busy. One point for our estate agent sort of fans out there, if we've got any estate agent fans, of course. Of course we have loads. I've really noticed a trend now with a lot of agents sort of, you know, advertising property on social media platforms because they can get it on there prior to, for example, getting it on Rightmove.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's a big push from that part of the industry. You know, with the fees and everything that Rightmove charge. You know, if they can get properties on social media and sell that way, that can only be good as well. And you know, if they can get those properties out there early as possible, they can sell them potentially even before they're on the Rightmove platforms.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, Stu. I hadn't thought about that at all. I mean, on the you know, again, we were just sort of talking about PI insurance, and I think probably, you know, the broader issue for conveyancing firms, isn't it, that I think it, you know, potentially because firms are still under so much pressure, clearly that increases the risk exponentially as a result of conveyancing work. And I think, you know, it could be another quite difficult PI round if we're not careful, a professional indemnity insurance round. And actually one thing that I saw sort of talked about on social media a bit in a professional indemnity insurance context, Stu, which you know, we didn't have any context, as you were saying off air, but there was this sort of suggestion that indemnity insurers were sort of requiring their insured firms to, if they were acting for a seller, to ask the buyer's conveyancer to confirm that they'd done the due diligence. But you know, I think you were you know, you felt perhaps there was a little lack of context there, Stu.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of my experience in dealing with, you know, indemnity insurance providers, brokers, insurers, I'm not quite sure how that would come up, you know, unless it's as a result of a claim and it's a particular issue that you're looking at. I'm not sure as a generalisation whether the insurers would be that specific. Might be completely wrong, and you know, stand to be corrected. But we've never been asked to provide that information or asked that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think probably two things come out of it. Firstly, you know, the consensus very much, and there's certainly the camp I'm in, that, you know, following Dream VAR amendments to the Code for Completion by Post, which if adopted unamended, you know, the seller's conveyancer is essentially warranting that they act for the true.
That's the key, though, isn't it? The key is the Code for Completion.
Exactly.
And if you're adopting it, and you're already providing, you know, that clarity, aren't you?
And the argument is, and you definitely should not be making any further inquiry of the buyer's, you know, of the seller's conveyancer accordingly. But of course, I think the bottom line point, which is sort of painfully obvious and slightly embarrassing to say, but you know, if firms are unsure, they should just be trotting straight back to their insurer or the terms of their policy and having a look. You know, they should be making sure that they are complying with their insurer's requirements. But anyway,
it's a difficult one, that subject, isn't it? Because you know, you could flip that both ways, and you could say, well, hang on a minute, you know, certain firms won't confirm that they're adopting the protocol till quite late in the transaction. So maybe as a buyer's lawyer, you want to ask those questions early doors because you hadn't had that clarity. There are quite different ways you can flip that.
I agree, but I do think what a lot of firms are doing now, and again, I see it because of the locum stuff, so I tend to have a little, view into firms in a way that a lot of practitioners don't. And similarly with the training, people say stuff. And what is certainly happening in a lot of firms is that the buyer's conveyancer is asking the seller's conveyancer sort of up front to confirm that they will adopt the code for completion by post 2019 version unamended. And some firms are even sort of requiring the production of the TA13 completion information and undertakings duly signed and confirming that prior to exchange. Now, of course, we do have the...
Do we think, though, I mean, there's a really interesting point that, if we think logically and practically about answers to requisitions and title, what they are, what they stand for, is the protocol behind the way they're produced and the way we submit them and deal with them a bit outdated? Should this not just be a given now that it's produced within the contract pattern provided at the onset?
Well, I suppose the point is, though, given that it contains the undertaking to redeem the seller's mortgage, you're not going to have that information at the beginning, are you? That would be the argument. You're going to get it. You'll get it pretty early on, but you won't probably have it at the time you issue the contract, I would say. I don't quite see why, if you're the seller's conveyancer, because, of course, the point about it is the code makes it clear that the seller's conveyancer can withdraw their acceptance of the code. And that's the key point, really. So the seller's conveyancer could theoretically pull the rug, which then, of course, would remove that warranty that they were acting for the true seller. So that, I think, is the risk. And the other risk of producing the TA13 too early is that the seller's conveyancer hasn't got the redemption figures and, isn't therefore certain that they can give the undertaking to redeem any mortgages. So, I think there are two different timing risks there, really, Stu. Just moving on, again, for the benefit of any lovely viewers who are working in Wales, or deal with properties in Wales, particularly in relation to dealing with residential tenancies. I mean, frankly, Stu, lots of conveyancing firms generally don't deal with residential tenancies these days. They leave it to the letting agents. But if we're buying a buy to let, for example, you're going to need to make sure that any tenancy is validly granted and all the rest of it. But really, just to no more than flag, don't really want to dwell on it. The Renting Home Wales Act is coming into force on the 15th of July. And actually, I have done a little bit on this, and it does really sort of substantially change the landscape for the residential letting sort of landscape in Wales. And commentators that know more about it than me are all saying, but hang on a minute, there's still loads and loads of detail missing here. We're bound to need some more regulations and theoretically more regulations on, how the Act will actually work in force are coming out. But the point is, if you are practicing in Wales and you have any sort of direct or peripheral involvement with residential tenancies, it's changing. We don't know as much detail as, the people that work in this area would like. Keep an eye on it, really. So anything else on the list, Stu, for April? We seem to, having thought at the beginning off air that we didn't have much to talk about, there's quite a lot to say.
Let me think. I'm just trying to think if there's something else. There might be one other thing. It just slipped my tongue. Just thinking something that might be happening soonish. We could be doing live, maybe. I don't know. Remind me.
Well, I mean, what we have, and maybe to conclude this chat, Stu, new build homes, NB, are apparently selling more quickly. Up to, I think I read some research by an organisation, they're perhaps selling sort of 28 days more quickly. But does that really make a lot of difference to us, the lovely conveyancers, Stu?
Does it? Well, these new builds, they're such a, what's the right word? I think there's a stigma maybe within the industry with certain practitioners are dealing with them because the speed at which we have to sort of, get them done, the pressures that we're under to do them, the volume of papers that are involved in looking at them. So does it make any difference? What do you think?
Well, I don't think the fact they're selling more quickly, I just think it adds an additional pressure. To be quite honest.
I think the likelihood practically we'll be dealing with them more and more. And because of that, the average person's pressure load, I suppose, increases, which is why, Lorraine. ... which is why we've decided, haven't we, to do a Conveyancing Matters live. And as people seem to have this fear about new build properties. We thought that would be our starting point to discuss them, all things good, bad, ugly, and what people might want to know practically.
Yeah, so it's the 25th of May. It's in London. It's an early evening event, so people can get to it. We'd be delighted to see people. It is a CPD event, so we're not just sort of chatting. We're giving value. We are, you know, telling you what things mean. We're hopefully suggesting solutions, how to approach things. So it's not just a sort of chin wag. It's going to be followed up by a couple of webinars that people purchasing the ticket can, you know, will get after the event as well. But yeah, we've decided to get out of our pajamas, Stu, and have, as I say, Conveyancing Matters live in London, which I'm really looking forward to. And as you say, new builds just seemed like a good topic, and frankly, this bit of research that's come out to show that they're selling more quickly, you know, is perhaps timely for you and I. So on the YouTube channel, there's a link to book a ticket if you're interested, and there's a lot more information on the Conveyancing Matters website as well. So, and we'd be delighted to see people, and obviously if there are any things too that people are particularly keen to know about in terms of new builds, then give us some suggestions, because we've already had some, which is great. So some delegates have already said, well, it'd be great if you could cover this and this, which of course we'll be really happy to do. And actually we will put out, won't we, Stu, in a week or so, you know, more detail about the content. People know what they're going to get. They're going to get you and me and a Peroni, but to be fair, they probably need to know what we're going to be talking about. So well, I think that's a fair bit for our lovely conveyancing friends to be thinking about, Stu. April 2022, another busy month for conveyancers. So let's see what May's got to bring. So thanks a lot, mate. I'll see you soon.
All right, take care. See you soon.
Bye.